So I just saw Elvis this past weekend and I thought it was really good. I'll admit I had my reservations about this film going in for a number of reasons, but I indeed did come out pleasantly surprised. Most of these concerns mainly came from my somewhat hit-and-miss feelings towards this being yet another music biopic film. When Bohemian Rhapsody dropped in 2018, it clearly set a standard for what these types of films should be, but in the most boring way possible. What we have in this movie isn't exactly awful, but it's such a bland film which does a disservice to one of the most eccentric singers of his time. Rocketman from 2019 felt like a true example of what to do with this sort of story. This film felt perfectly in tune with the weirdness of Elton John, and the film being set up as a big musical spectacle from his perspective was really riveting to watch. It pretty much taught the world that if you want to do a music biopic right, it must fit the tone and style imbued by the artist it's focusing on. And in Elvis's case, I can confidently say that this more stylized approach is exactly how they decided to adapt the life story of Elvis Presley. Now, Baz Luhrmann is the director of this film. Having made the likes of The Great Gatsby and Moulin Rouge, he clearly has a knack for adding a lot of flavour and colour into every aspect of his direction. This alone makes him the perfect director for Elvis, as we are whisked on a journey that can be best described as a visceral assault on the senses. Almost every creative choice about this film is loud and active and really puts you in the creative mindset of Elvis. Austin Butler is also really good in this role and an obvious frontrunner for the acting Oscar this year. Much like Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury, he manages to embody the personality and minor slurring of his lines like the musician he's portraying, while also being able to make himself feel like an actual character. Tom Hanks is also pretty good in this film as Tom Parker, the antagonistic manager that takes Elvis to the top. His prosthetics are a bit of a mixed bag, but Tom Hanks does the best with the materials he's given and still does a good performance anyway. It might genuinely be the first time I've seen Hanks play such an intentionally awful character, and that's just simply uncomfortable coming from a man as beloved as Tom Blinking Hanks. I only have one major issue with this film, and unfortunately it's a little bit of a biggie. The runtime. This film is 160 minutes long, and while not the longest film ever made, you do feel its length from top to bottom, and it makes for kind of an exhausting experience. The story on the whole feels very complete and purposeful, but you can also pinpoint certain scenes and moments that could have been shaved off to make for a more streamlined experience. Baz Luhrmann already has a massively active and over-the-top directorial style for his film that can almost be described as sensory overload, and for a film this long it can be a bit draining. It's not a huge issue because I still really enjoyed this film and found it to be a very poignant and rewarding experience. Just maybe don't buy the large Coca-Cola when you go into the cinema doors. Your bladder will not take it. I give this film an 8 out of 10. It's really good. It is a hugely draining but ultimately rewarding film that I think any fan of Elvis Presley should check out. I also saw Minions: The Rise of Gru and I do want to begin this by saying that I do really like the first Despicable Me. It's not an amazing film by any means, but what is here is a pretty cute and charming family film. It's about as predictable of a story about a villain turning good as you can get, but it's elevated by pretty solid jokes and a very Eurocentric art style. Seriously, go back and rewatch this movie and play back some of the gags. This movie nails dark comedy quite well.
No! Stay away from there and scratch!
Hey! It's dark in here. I poked a hole in my juice box.
Not an amazing film, but one that is definitely worth watching at least once. It's a 7 out of 10 movie. With that said, for as much as I like the first Despicable Me, I never really found much appeal in the Minions. In that first film, they were fairly serviceable as cute comic reliefs that could provide cheap laughs in between scenes. But when they become more integrated into the story, like with the subsequent sequels, they can become kind of insufferable. The Minions are built on a hopeless foundation as a concept because their only shtick is that they make loud noises, and there's a lot of slapstick, and it's because of this why it's easy for them to appeal to children and Facebook mums. Much like its predecessor, Minions: The Rise of Gru can be best described as an 88-minute headache. It's perhaps not as aggressively awful as the first Minions, but it doesn't stop it from being any less irritating and substanceless. Being a film with more of a focus on Gru's origins as a villain and his desire to join his heroes the Vicious Six, there is more of a story going on here for sure. But it doesn't go anywhere really, as Gru gets kidnapped and the film becomes another boring road trip film with characters that barely even qualify as characters to begin with. There are some references to the first Despicable Me that gave me some sweet serotonin, such as a young Dr. Nefario, and to give the film credit, it does have quite a fun and inspired climax with the characters turning into animals. It's here where the film gets a bit more creative and inspired with the animation, and I gotta give credit where it's due. I know it's easy picking to say bad things about a film like this when people are just going to respond, "Kyle, this is a kids movie, cut it some slack." Just because it's a kids movie doesn't mean that the filmmakers didn't have to try. If DreamWorks, Pixar and Sony Animation have proved anything, it's that you can make films aimed at a family audience that are still damn good and inspiring stories in their own right. The Bad Guys came out this year, and that film has some striking visuals and fun heist sequences to boot. Turning Red was a delightfully quirky and fun film about a teenager going through life, with the red panda being used as a striking metaphor. These films have stories and themes that anyone of any age can latch onto. Films that use animation and storytelling in a creative way that elevates the medium and can leave a positive impression on a youthful audience. I don't think that sort of thing applies to Minions or any of the other films from Illumination for that matter. Some of their films aren't terrible, but they are so safe as a studio and such a machine that it's hard to really love any of their work. What I'm trying to say is that a film like Minions: The Rise of Gru could have worked if there was some actually clever comedy or some emotional hook. But it's just hard to get invested when most of its runtime is nothing but
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
I'm giving this a 3 out of 10. Kids will probably have a blast, but this is nothing more than brainless fodder when there are plenty of other films out right now worth your time and money. Alright, thank you everybody, and good night.